Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Xu Baocai had completely ignited by Xiaochun's desire to reach Foundation establishment. In the following days, he went to the Scripture Pavilion on numerous occasions, and eventually, even went to the Divine Might Hall. The Divine Might Hall was a place where much general information about the cultivation world was gathered for the purposes of study. After studying the detailed explanation about Foundation establishment, Bai Xiaochun confirmed that what Xu Baocai had said was accurate, and it was like a spark was lit within him. In his view, only by reaching Foundation establishment could he truly take his first step upon the road of eternal life. What got him even more excited was the information about how there were 3 ways to reach Foundation establishment, each of which affected longevity in a different way. At long last, he had a much clearer understanding. Heaven, earth, and mortal. 3 types of Foundation establishment. Mortal Dao Foundation establishment requires a Foundation establishment pill. The probability of success is low, but if you succeed, you acquire 100 years of longevity. Earth Dao Foundation establishment involves absorbing earth string energy and transforming it into shocking power. The probability of success is even lower, but the result is an addition of 200 years of longevity. Last is the legendary Heaven Dao Foundation establishment. That's very rare, and can only come via random chance. However, if you can succeed with that type of Foundation establishment, then you get an extra 500 years of longevity. After more detailed study, Bai Xiaochun confirmed that Heaven Dao Foundation establishment could not be specifically pursued. As for Earth Dao Foundation establishment, there were special requirements to be able to acquire earth string energy. Therefore, the simplest thing for him to do was aim for Mortal Dao Foundation establishment, which required a Foundation establishment pill. Bai Xiaochun put down the jade slip he was holding and took a deep breath, his eyes shining brightly. I need to start planning for the future, and make sure I'm completely prepared. And I have to get one of those Foundation establishment pills. Foundation establishment pills are expensive, and just to be prepared for all possibilities, I should definitely have more than one on hand. In that case, the best thing to do would be to concoct some myself. Bai Xiaochun's eyes flickered as his dream of becoming a master apothecary and concocting a live forever never die pill became even stronger than ever. Apprentice apothecary, journeyman apothecary, master apothecary. Right now I'm an apprentice apothecary. To become a journeyman apothecary, I have to concoct some medicinal pills and take the promotion test. The minimum requirement for the test is that you master the 5th volume of Plants and Vegetation. But that alone is no guarantee. I also need to completely master all 5 volumes of Spirit Creatures. Eyes gleaming with determination, he pulled out the jade slip that contained the 3rd volume of Plants and Vegetation and went through it in detail one more time. After confirming that he had memorized everything, he immediately left his courtyard. However, moments later, he came running back and quickly put on several layers of clothing, and also disguised himself a bit. Only then did he actually leave. Those fans of Xianxia are too frightening. Supposedly they've been telling people they're going to cut me to pieces. I really have no choice other than to keep a low profile. He still felt a little bit uneasy. After considering the difference between himself and Xianxia's fans, he finally reached a decision. HMPH. Just wait until I reach Foundation establishment. Then I'll make a big scene and tell everyone that I'm Lord Turtle. Then we'll see who dares to try to cut me to pieces. As usual, the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion was completely packed. It wasn't just Outer Sect disciples from Fragrant Cloud Peak in attendance, there were also disciples from Green Crest Peak and Violet Cauldron Peak, who for various reasons were required to be proficient in plants and vegetation. Currently, Bai Xiaochun was worming his way through the crowd, trying to make sure he didn't attract any attention. After reaching the log cabin dedicated to the 3rd volume of Plants and Vegetation, he snuck in, took the test, then melted back into the crowd. Although he had originally planned to just leave, after a moment passed, he couldn't hold back from popping his head up and looking around. It didn't take long before a clamor rose up as people realized that on the stone stele of the third volume of Plants and Vegetation, the turtle design had overtaken the magic bottle. Feeling quite pleased, he plastered a shocked look on his face and shouted out in astonishment. However, it only took a moment for Xianxia's fiendish fans to appear, which caused Bai Xiaochun to ball his fists in frustration. It's their fault that I have to keep such a low profile, he thought angrily. He glared at them for a moment and then turned and hurried away. In the following days, news about the little turtle once again spread like wildfire through Fragrant Cloud Peak's outer sect. Everyone was talking about the little turtle design that was so prominently displayed on the stone steles. However, another month later, just as the rumors were beginning to settle down, the disciples outside the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion suddenly noticed that the little turtle had appeared on the fourth stone stele, and it had once again passed the magic bottle to take first place. The result was an instant uproar. The little turtle is going to completely surpass elder sister Xianxia soon. He has 4 first-place spots. He has 4 stone steles, and elder sister Xianxia has 5. Just who is the little turtle? Of course, it was Bai Xiaochun shouting these things out, and it made him feel quite good. However, when Xianxia's fans started devolving into a frenzy, he cleared his throat, lowered his head, and went on his way. A few days later, Xianxia showed up in the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion and studied the 4 stone steles, a very serious expression on her face. Then she entered the 10th stone stele. When she emerged, her name now occupied the first-place spot. By that point, all of the outer sect disciples on Fragrant Cloud Peak were paying close attention to the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion. Xianxia had her 6 stone steles, and the little turtle had 4. Everyone was speculating as to whether or not the little turtle would eventually take a 5th stone stele, which would put him on par with Xianxia. In fact, some of the outer sect disciples were starting to place bets on whether or not the little turtle could actually take first place in 5 stone steles. It even reached the point that some of the elders of Fragrant Cloud Peak were taking note. Bai Xiaochun was going absolutely all out to try to take that next first-place spot. After getting the relevant jade slip, he studied it day and night. Coupled with how much he hated Xianxia's fans, whenever he made his monthly visit to the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion and got a first-place spot, he would make a point of whipping up the crowd in favor of the little turtle. Gradually, quite a few disciples began to admire the little turtle, and much of that had to do with Bai Xiaochun himself. He never passed up an opportunity to promote the little turtle to whomever he could speak to about it. For example, by this point, Xiaomai was thoroughly obsessed. Eventually, a month later on a bright and sunny day, the magic bottle on the 5th stone stele flickered and then dropped down by 1 spot, whereupon the little turtle appeared above it. As of that moment, the outer sect disciples of Fragrant Cloud Peak were thrown into pandemonium. Entire crowds came to check out the scene, and soon, all conversations on the mountain revolved around the little turtle. The little turtle's skill with plants and vegetation is definitely at an indescribable level. How else could he be so shocking? So awesome. The little turtle and elder sister Ju are about the same now. It wasn't that nobody in the crowd suspected that the little turtle might be Bai Xiaochun. In fact, some of Xianxia's fans didn't ignore any possibilities, and naturally were paying attention to him. Feeling quite indignant, Bai Xiaochun decided that he needed to get rid of any doubts, so he made a big scene of reluctantly trying to take the test for the 4th stone stele. He remained inside for a bit, after which he stepped out and did his best to convince everyone that he had performed badly. After doing this a few times, Xianxia's fans started to shift their attention to others. Of course, there was no way to prove anything about anybody one way or another. However, they continued to spread hateful gossip, telling people that if they found out who the little turtle was, they weren't going to cut him into bits, they were going to cut him into teeny tiny bits. When Bai Xiaochun heard about that, and thought about what he would look like in such a state, he began to tremble. Finally, he gritted his teeth, and his vicious determination once again bubbled up. Not happy, huh? Well, I'll make you even less happy when I take more first-place spots. Gritting his teeth, he decided that he was going to make that happen, and close the distance between himself and Xianxia. A month later, the little turtle took first place on the 6th stone stele. After another month, it took first place on the 7th. Shouts of alarm and astonishment rang out around the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion at that point. 7 first-place spots. Go, little turtle, go. Not even elder sister Ju was able to get 10 first-place spots. Ha ha ha, I like this little turtle. He's definitely going to pull it off. Even as numerous disciples in the crowd were crying out such things, there were a dozen or so young men in the area, all of whom had very grim expressions on their faces. Some of them were even inner sect disciples, whose expressions were particularly icy. One of them was a young man with a pockmarked face, whose eyes glinted with particular ferocity. "Ladies and gentlemen, fellow disciples," he called out. "If anyone knows who the little turtle is, please tell me, and I'll owe you a favor." That pock-faced young man's voice caused everyone to tremble, and instantly silenced all of the voices calling out about the little turtle. People in the crowd immediately recognized who this young man was, and quickly averted their gazes. Others were incensed, but were too afraid to speak up. "That's elder brother Qian from the Hall of Justice, Qian Dajin. I heard that he's been chasing both elder sister Ju and also Du Lingfei." Bai Xiaochun stood there in the crowd, glaring at the pock-faced Qian Dajin with righteous indignation. Finally, he stalked back to his courtyard, feeling very irritated. "You can't even find me, and yet you insist on fighting a duel with me." Setting his jaw, he focused on studying the 5 volumes of spirit creatures. As he learned more about how the various parts of spirit creatures could be used when concocting spirit medicines, his skill with plants and vegetation made further advancement. In fact, because he was able to compare and contrast the two, and see how they work together, his skill with plants and vegetation actually experienced significant growth. The next month, the little turtle design replaced the magic bottle as the first-place spot holder on the 8th stone stele. After another month, he took first place in the 9th. He now had 9 first-place spots. The outer sect disciples around the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion were aboil. More and more people were loudly proclaiming that the little turtle was definitely going to take 10 first-place spots. As for Ju Xianxia's fans, there was nothing they could do to stop it at this point. All they could do was watch as the little turtle's popularity gradually exceeded Ju Xianxia's. When the final month came, Bai Xiaochun went to the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion when it was at its busiest. He went in disguise, but his expression was one of determination as he worked his way unnoticed through the line leading up to the log cabin beneath the 10th stone stele. Once he entered, he sat down cross-legged, reached out, and placed his hand onto the stone altar. Rumbling filled his mind as he once again entered that familiar void. In front of him were 1 million flickering fragments of medicinal plants and spirit creatures. Eyes gleaming with focus, his hands began to fly about and reorganize the pieces. 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 30,000, 50,000, 80,000. This was the most difficult of all the tests he had taken so far. Soon, sweat was dripping down his face, and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked crazed, as if he had forgotten about everything else. He was fully immersed in the process of reconstructing plants and vegetation, and spirit creatures. His hands hurt, and his mind reeled, and yet he kept going. Before long, the test was over, and Bai Xiaochun sat here, his hands trembling as he put the last medicinal plant together. With that, his vision went blurry, then cleared, and he was back in the log cabin. Breathing heavily, eyes shining with satisfaction, he wiped the sweat from his brow and clenched his fists. "10 stone steles, 10 first-place spots." The 3 peaks on the south bank of the Spirit Stream sect were completely shaken. Outside the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion, a buzz of conversation could be heard. People were speeding over from all directions to catch a glimpse of the little turtle in first place on all 10 stone steles. Gasps rang out. 10 first-place spots. The little turtle actually did it. The last time anyone in the Spirit Stream sect ever took 10 first-place spots in the stone steles was 1,000 years ago. How could I ever have imagined that I would see something like this in my life? Everyone was clamoring in shock, and although many people had predicted that this would happen, it was still a shocking event. That was especially true considering the previous 3 months, in which one stone steely after another fell into the hands of the little turtle. When people thought about that, they simply couldn't stay calm. Just who exactly is the little turtle? In less than half a year, he started from the 3rd stone steely and then swept through all his competition in the rest of them. This guy is totally famous. His skill with plants and vegetation completely exceeds Xianxia's. Maybe in the future, there will even be another master apothecary in addition to Xianxia. In the same moment that the little turtle secured first place on all 10 stone steelies, the steelies began to vibrate, letting off intense rumbling noises that merged together, and then were joined by the sound of a clanging cauldron coming from further up the mountain. It was as if someone were striking a medicine cauldron with an enormous log. The muffled boom spread out through all of Fragrant Cloud Peak, and then echoed out to fill the entire south bank of the Spirit Stream sect. It was accompanied by a medicinal aroma that filled the area, and caused the mists that covered Fragrant Cloud Peak to grow even thicker. At the top of Fragrant Cloud Peak was an immortal's cave where Elder Jew was in the middle of feeding some of his cherished 5-colored spirit birds. When he heard the sound of the cauldron, his eyes lit up with surprise. The Fragrant Cloud Cauldron. He sent his divine sense out and instantly detected what was happening among the 10 stone steelies outside the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion. His expression immediately flickered, and he stepped out into the air. Next, Elder Sun appeared, along with other Foundation establishment cultivators. All of them had heard the sound of the cauldron, and were now proceeding in the direction of the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion, excited expressions on their faces. The last to appear was Li Qinghu, who had been in the middle of meditation. When he heard the sound of the cauldron, his face flickered, and he looked outside. Then, he transformed into a beam of colorful light that shot toward the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion. As the sound of the cauldron rang out, the crowd grew even more excited. Both the outer sect and inner sect disciples of Fragrant Cloud Peak were completely shaken, and many began to rush in the direction of the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion. That's the sound of the precious treasure of Fragrant Cloud Peak, the Fragrant Cloud Cauldron. Someone took 10 first-place spots at the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion. That hasn't happened for 1,000 years. This is unheard of. Excitement even broke out on Green Crest Peak and Violet Cauldron Peak. Big Fatty Jong was hanging his head as a beautiful, alluring woman berated him. That woman was none other than the old shrew that Big Fatty Jong had complained to by Xiaochun about. As soon as she heard the sound of the cauldron, her expression flickered, and she looked off into the distance. Big Fatty Jong's face fell in shock as he did the same thing. The sound of the Fragrant Cloud Cauldron. Could it be that some disciple on Fragrant Cloud Peak has actually gotten perfect results in all of the tests? Similar scenes played out on Green Crest Peak, causing the elders and the Peak Lord there to look over in astonishment. More and more people were filling the area around the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion. Bai Xiaochun was there in the crowd, and when he heard the uproar, he looked up at the 10 stone steelies. Although he didn't join in with the shouting, his heart was filled with an indescribable feeling. He stood there, a smile growing on his face, not a complacent smile or a lofty smile, a smile of pure happiness. It had taken him more than a year to work this miracle. He had started from the first stone steely, then taken first place in all 10. However, having a bunch of first-place spots didn't mean much to him in the end. The most important thing was that he had gained a complete mastery over plants and vegetation, as well as the spirit creatures, something that apprentice apothecaries needed to be proficient in. He had crafted an unprecedentedly deep foundation. As he thought back to the long days and endless nights he had spent obsessively studying plants and vegetation, and then spirit creatures, Bai Xiaochun sighed emotionally. In the entire Spirit Stream sect, there weren't even any inner sect disciples who had such a strong foundation in their skill with plants and vegetation. Currently, Bai Xiaochun was feeling very satisfied. Soon, numerous beams of light could be seen flying through the air, all of them emanating powerful cultivation-based fluctuations. Among them were Elder Jew, Elder Sun, and of course Li Qinghu. They looked over the 10 stone steelies, and the little turtle in the first place spot, and their eyes began to shine brightly. That was especially true of Li Qinghu. That little turtle design caused him to first start in shock, then begin to laugh loudly, a strange expression on his face. He looked out over the crowd, and caught sight of Bai Xiaochun, after which a glint of praise appeared in his eyes that no one could detect. After a long moment passed, he flicked his sleeve and left, quite happy after having guessed that the little turtle belonged to none other than Bai Xiaochun. Soon, the other members of the senior generation left. However, more and more inner sect disciples were showing up to stare in shock at the little turtle. After all, they had all risen up from the outer sect, and knew very well that only outer sect disciples were allowed to challenge the stone steelies. They also knew how difficult of a challenge that was. Any outer sect disciple who can do this is definitely a chosen. HMPH. We're journeyman apothecaries, so all we care about is spirit medicines. Incredible skill with plants and vegetation is meaningless if you can't concoct spirit medicine. Some of the inner sect disciples clearly admired the little turtle, and others disdained it. However, regardless of their feelings, a deep impression had been made, and in fact, most of them were actually a bit frightened. None of them had any idea how skilled this person would be at medicine concocting, but with such a solid foundation, once that person became a journeyman apothecary, his path would certainly be much smoother. The uproar continued until eventually Xianxia showed up. She stood there on her blue flying silk, examining the little turtle. Slowly, the crowd quieted down, and all eyes turned in her direction. The sight of the little turtle in the first place spot on all of the stone steelies caused an unyielding gleam to appear in her eyes. In the past, this was the sort of complicated expression that she caused to appear in the eyes of others. But now, the opposite had happened. "Just who are you?" she murmured through clenched teeth. Although she couldn't bear to admit it, she had tried hard on numerous occasions to match the mysterious little turtle in terms of skill with plants and vegetation, but his ability was just too profound. As of this moment, she had no confidence whatsoever in being able to surpass him. By now, that little turtle was completely and utterly branded onto her heart. "You might be stronger than me with plants and vegetation, but just wait until you become a journeyman apothecary. I refuse to believe that you'll surpass me when it comes to medicine concocting." She took a deep breath and calmed herself down. She had already taken the test and been promoted to journeyman apothecary, so after giving the stone steelies one last look, she spun and vanished off into the distance. After giving the 10 stone steelies one last look, Bai Xiaochun turned and left. "This is just the first stop along my path to becoming a grandmaster apothecary." The matter of the 10 stone steelies caused a commotion that lasted for months. People talked about it non-stop, especially when they went to the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion and actually saw the little turtle on the stone steelies. Meanwhile, Xianxia's fans were combing the sect, employing all tactics possible to try to figure out who the little turtle was. That was especially true of the young man surnamed Qian, who was infuriated about the matter. The entire south bank of the Spirit Stream sect was affected. While people were constantly discussing the little turtle, Bai Xiaochun was in his courtyard, eyes bloodshot as he controlled a tree leaf that floated in front of him. He was now studying the stage of heaviness in lightness. Actually, he had repeatedly attempted to do so throughout the past half-year, but it wasn't until now that he had been able to do anything with it. Because of how things had ended at the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion, Xianxia's fans were constantly searching for him. A sensation of crisis slowly built up within him, so he decided to weather things out in his residence while he worked on heaviness in lightness. Lightness in heaviness is about speed. Heaviness in lightness is about control methods. A thoughtful expression appeared in Bai Xiaochun's eyes as he pondered everything he had come to understand recently. Or perhaps you could say that such control is actually an eruption of one's internal spiritual energy. Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered. He was now in the 6th level of qi condensation, and his internal spiritual energy was like a huge river. When it came to lightness in heaviness, he could sustain it indefinitely and unleash shocking speed. He had long since come to understand that the so-called stage of heaviness in lightness was simply a way of utilizing one's internal spiritual energy. It was like how a flat leaf could be used to pull a small branch up into the air, but a rolled-up leaf could hoist up a small rock. Likewise, if you cut a leaf into strips and then braided it into a rope, it would be able to lift even heavier objects. Many materials were like that. In the end, the different weights that could be lifted depended simply on how one combined the various elements. Heaviness in lightness was just such a technique, and by mastering it, you could reach a new stage. Bai Xiaochun thought about the matter for a bit longer, then waved his hand, causing another leaf to fly over, which he began to experiment with. Sometimes the leaf moved quickly, at other times it moved as slowly as if a mountain were crushing onto it. However, he wasn't getting the result he wanted. After one try didn't work, he tried 10 times. After 10 tries didn't work, he tried 100 times. After 100 tries didn't work, he tried 1,000 times. He eventually lost track of how many times he had tried. Soon, his courtyard was filled with fragments of leaves which had been destroyed, and he even had to go out looking for new leaves. Eventually, nearly all of the spirit plants on Fragrant Cloud Peak were devoid of leaves, until, on one particular day, Bai Xiaochun's eyes flickered, and he performed an incantation gesture and pointed out. The leaf in front of him was floating there gently, but when it fell to the ground it sounded like a boulder. A huge boom rang out, and the entire courtyard residence shook. It was as if that one leaf weighed hundreds of kilograms. It worked. Bai Xiaochun's eyes were shot with blood, but his expression was one of excitement. He suddenly waved his hand, sending his little wooden sword flying out. It turned into a black streak that shot through the air with incredible speed. It was now even more incredible than before, and emanated a shrill whistling sound as it pierced through the air. Then, a boom rang out as a huge boulder was shattered to pieces. Such incredible power was no longer equivalent to the 6th level of qi condensation. Even someone in the 7th level of qi condensation would be completely shocked by what had just happened. Bai Xiaochun looked very excited as he leaped to his feet and shook out his arms and legs, then sent the wooden sword flying around the courtyard dramatically. Sometimes it would speed through the air rapidly, other times it would hang ponderously in the air, motionless. The wooden sword experienced a complete transformation there in the courtyard. Soon, sword qi swirled around the entire area, almost as if a huge wind had kicked up. Bai Xiaochun was even more excited than before. A moment later, he waved his right hand, and the little wooden sword flew back into his hand. The gaudy sword didn't look very remarkable, but the truth of the matter was that thanks to the threefold spirit enhancement, it was completely beyond what it had been before. If I can master both heaviness in lightness and lightness in heaviness, then by using them together, I can perform the only divine ability within the violet qi cauldron control art. Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath, and his eyes shone with anticipation. Violet qi cauldron summoning. Bai Xiaochun put the wooden sword away, then closed his eyes for a long moment. Suddenly, he lifted his right hand and pointed up into the sky. Instantly, his previously invisible internal spiritual energy suddenly appeared in a dazzling flash, the thin strands of spiritual energy rapidly forming into the outline of a cauldron. It was as if some mysterious power were guiding them, transforming them into that specific shape. Pulses of incredible pressure began to radiate out from the cauldron, spirit pressure which was even more powerful than the pressure from the flying sword. Bai Xiaochun's face rapidly drained of blood as the spirit pressure within him was depleted by nearly 80%. At that point, the cauldron was fully formed, and was emanating an intense spirit pressure. Bai Xiaochun gestured with his fingers, sending the cauldron smashing down toward the ground. When that happened, the cauldron shattered, and vast quantities of spiritual energy scattered about. A powerful boom echoed out, and the ground for 300 meters in all directions emitted cracking sounds as fissures spread out. Thankfully, Fragrant Cloud Peak's protective spell formation almost instantly repaired the damage. Even still, quite a few outer sect disciples who were nearby heard the muffled boom, and were shocked. Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath. He had never imagined that the violet qi cauldron summoning would be so impressive. A single attack from it seemed almost unbeatable. Violet qi cauldron summoning definitely deserves to be the only divine ability within the violet qi cauldron control art. No wonder it can only be unleashed after both heaviness in lightness and lightness in heaviness are completely understood. Bai Xiaochun's eyes shone with a brilliant light, but almost in the same instant, he frowned. Although this divine ability was strong, it took a lot of energy out of him. Bai Xiaochun knew that the reason he had wasted only 80% of his spiritual power, and not more, was because it was so pure. Any other disciple who gained enlightenment of this divine ability before the 8th level of qi condensation would have had all of their internal spiritual energy drained. The only way to truly utilize the technique without incredible wastage was to wait until the 9th level of qi condensation. According to the description of the violet qi cauldron summoning, it can be divided into high-grade, mid-grade, and low-grade levels. The cauldron I just produced was low-grade. If I can reach the mid-grade level, I'll be able to form 2 cauldrons. By reaching high-grade, I can have 3 cauldrons, then form them together into one big cauldron. After standing there thoughtfully for a moment, Bai Xiaochun sat down cross-legged and began to perform breathing exercises. It was not until the moon hung high in the sky that he finally opened his eyes, revealing a bright spirit glow in his eyes. As of now, his cultivation base had almost fully recovered. A divine ability like this can be used as a trump card. If Zhu Xianxia's fans ever mess with me, I can use it to crush them. Although Bai Xiaochun felt a little bit better, when he thought about the inner sect disciple named Qian, his brow furrowed. You have to be at least in the 8th level of qi condensation to get into the inner sect. When he thought about that, Bai Xiaochun felt just as worried as before. He glanced down thoughtfully at his skin for a moment, and his eyes glittered. With that, he rose to his feet and took a few steps forward, picking up speed as he reached out with his thumb and index finger. A black light flashed as the tips of those 2 fingers then touched each other. Cracking sounds rang out in the air, along with an explosive aura. Bai Xiaochun looked at his 2 fingers in surprise for a moment before recovering his composure. This is a killing move that I can use to save my own life. After some more thought, he came to the conclusion that the more powerful the killing move, the better it would be for him. Now, the main thing he was worried about was the undying live forever technique. After acquiring his undying iron skin, he had attempted to continue cultivating the undying live forever technique, but found that as soon as he began, he started feeling hungry again. Furthermore, the spirit tail chickens on the south bank of the spirit stream sect were no longer an option. He had only ordinary spirit food to rely on, which he was sure wouldn't be enough to stave off his hunger. He had searched the rest of the mountain high and low for other spirit creatures to eat, but ever since the chicken-thieving fiend's rise to fame, the 3 mountains on the south bank began to closely guard all the areas where spirit creatures were raised. The anxiety on his face grew as he contemplated the problem. Even as he pondered how to solve the problem of the intense hunger, he suddenly thought back to the age-prolonging longevity-enhancing pill. Yeah, that's right, he said, eyes beginning to shine brightly. Not only could that pill increase one's cultivation base, it also replenished vital energy. After acquiring his undying iron skin, he realized that cultivating it actually required vital energy, which was why he got so hungry. I've made huge strides in my skill with plants and vegetation, and although I haven't been promoted yet, I can still concoct medicine on my own. Furthermore, although the cost of some spirit medicines is very high within the sect, the actual ingredients are relatively cheap. Bai Xiaochun was becoming more and more convinced that he had come up with a solution. Basically, I can just concoct my own medicine. That way, when the time comes to take the promotion test, I'll be much more confident. Also, it will be much easier to concoct a foundation establishment pill in the future. Having made his decision, he set his jaw thoughtfully to ponder the matter further. The next morning at dawn, he fairly leapt to his feet. Concocting medicines requires medicine formulas, and I can get those even without being promoted to journeyman apothecary. All I have to do is head to the market at the bottom of the mountain and I'll be able to purchase whatever random medicine formulas are available. Bai Xiaochun patted his bag of holding and thought about how he hadn't really spent much money at all since arriving at Fragrant Cloud Peak. As an outer sect disciple, he was given a stipend of spirit stones every month, which meant he had quite a bit of savings built up. The truth was that Bai Xiaochun didn't really care much about material possessions, though. He immediately flew out of his courtyard onto the path that led down the mountain. During the entire time he had been on Fragrant Cloud Peak, this was only the second time he had left the mountain to go to the markets. The first time was when he had purchased the medicinal plant he needed to trade for that medicinal pill. Almost as soon as he stepped foot off of Fragrant Cloud Peak, 2 people suddenly flew toward a nearby courtyard residence. Elder Brother Chen, are you home? Elder Brother Chen, Bai Xiaochun left the mountain. These 2 people were both quite powerful, with extraordinary cultivation bases in the 4th level of qi condensation. They burst excitedly into the courtyard, where a burly man could be seen sitting cross-legged in meditation. The burly man was incredibly muscular, as broad-shouldered as a bear and as tough-looking as a lion, and as soon as he heard the words spoken by the two men, a bright gleam flickered in his eyes. Bai Xiaochun? So, he finally left the mountain, huh? The burly man laughed viciously, then suddenly shot to his feet. He looked as big as a mountain, and had profound energy, which came from a cultivation in the 5th level of qi condensation. As a result, he emanated a powerful spirit pressure. This was none other than Chen Fei, who used to work in the supervisor's department. These three had been friends since back in those days, and at that time had lacked for virtually nothing. Not only did they have other servants to wait on them back then, they had also been able to embezzle quite a sum of spirit stones. Of course, they had never expected to be literally pushed into the outer sect by Xiaochun and his friends. The past 2 years had been hard on them, and their hatred for Bai Xiaochun had seeped deep into their bones. However, they couldn't afford to provoke Big Fatty Zhong, much less Third Fatty He. On the other hand, even though Bai Xiaochun seemed strong, they were of the opinion that he was actually relatively weak. Thus they had long since planned their revenge. Unfortunately for them, during that entire time, Bai Xiaochun never left the sect. And in the end, even though Chen Fei had some connections, he didn't dare to violate sect rules. Actually, his biggest connection in the sect was his older cousin, who was an inner sect disciple. However, his cousin didn't pay much attention to him, and had only helped him to a limited degree, even in his days as a servant. Therefore, they had been forced to wait for 2 whole years for Bai Xiaochun to leave the sect. Now, the moment they had been waiting for had arrived. Chen Fei was feeling completely confident thanks to his recent breakthrough into the 5th level of qi condensation. After asking around, he knew the level of Bai Xiaochun's cultivation, and had also heard about him taking first place in the recent competition, although the news was that he had won that victory by pure chance. Back then he scared us all by tricking us into thinking he had mastered lightness in heaviness. HMPH. I can't believe he forced us into joining the outer sect. At long last, I'm going to give vent to this anger of mine. A fierce gleam appeared in Chen Fei's eyes. His plan wasn't to kill Bai Xiaochun, just crush his bones and sever his tendons, enough to keep him bedridden for at least a year. Although the sect would surely investigate the matter afterwards, because there would be no eyewitnesses, because no death would be involved, and because Chen Fei had connections in the sect, the big matter would become a small one, and then that small matter would be easily resolved. You can't blame us if he just doesn't measure up. Chen Fei flickered into motion, immediately heading down off the mountain, followed by his 2 friends. The 3 of them moved at top speed to a certain path they knew that Bai Xiaochun would pass on his way back from the market, and lay there in wait. The market wasn't huge, so it didn't take Bai Xiaochun long to find 2 random Tier 1 formulas. One of them could be used to replenish spiritual energy, the other was to enrich vital energy. When it came to formulas for enriching vital energy, the high-tier versions were very expensive. However, the low-tier versions, despite being uncommon, were mostly used by mortals for health and exercise purposes. Although most cultivators wouldn't find them useful, to Bai Xiaochun, they were like precious treasures. After using his turtle walk to perform a 3-fold spirit enhancement on the resulting medicinal pills, they would have completely different results. Bai Xiaochun didn't even spend very many of his spirit stones to get the necessary medicinal plants he would need to concoct the spirit medicines. Patting his bag of holding in happiness, he began to hum a little tune as he left the market. As he walked along the little path back to the sect, he fantasized about what it would be like to concoct the medicines, and he was very happy. However, before he had walked very far down the path, his expression suddenly flickered, and he stopped in place. After reaching the 6th level of qi condensation, his senses had grown much keener, and he could instantly detect the breathing of 3 people hiding in the nearby bushes. Their hearts were also racing as they watched him coming up the path. Seeing that Bai Xiaochun had stopped in place, Chen Fei and his 2 friends burst out to stand in front of him. Bai Xiaochun, he said viciously, the day has come to end our grudge. His friends wore equally ferocious grins on their faces as they spread out to flank Bai Xiaochun. Chen Fei. Bai Xiaochun blurted, blinking. He quickly scanned Chen Fei and his two friends, and after determining the level of their cultivation bases, immediately relaxed. Bai Xiaochun, even if you drop to the ground and beg for mercy, it's too late. It was your idea to force us into the outer sect, and you're going to pay for that. I, Chen Fei, have been waiting for this day for a long, long time. Laughing loudly, Chen Fei waved his right hand, unleashing the power of the 5th level of qi condensation. Numerous leaves were swept up into the air as a result, making for a very impressive scene. After joining the outer sect, I spent the entire time practicing cultivation, and now I'm in the 5th level of qi condensation. Let me tell you, Bai Xiaochun, today you will truly understand what it means to be bullied. Your bones are going to be broken and your tendons severed. Laughing with complacent arrogance, Chen Fei performed an incantation gesture with his right hand, causing a green flying sword to appear. It was only about 15 centimeters long, but radiated a cold, ancient air. As for Chen Fei's two friends who had flanked Bai Xiaochun, they smiled viciously as they unleashed their cultivation bases and produced their own flying swords. Considering they had him surrounded, and outnumbered him 3-1, they were completely confident that they could crush Bai Xiaochun. That was especially true after their own analysis led them to the conclusion that Bai Xiaochun had never fully mastered lightness in heaviness like they originally thought he had. You would have been safe if you had never left the mountain. But here you are, outside the sect. And now you will understand the great price to be paid for the error of your ways. Chen Fei felt a little better after having vented in this way, although anger still burned within him. Aren't the three of you afraid of violating sect rules by ambushing me here? Bai Xiaochun asked, genuinely curious. Sect rules? Ha ha ha. We're outside the sect right now. Plus, you don't measure up to us at all in skill. No one's going to blame us for breaking a few bones and severing some tendons. At the worst, we'll have to make some apologies, and then the whole matter will be over with. Chen Fei laughed proudly, imagining the image of Bai Xiaochun smashing into the ground. He was even preparing some good taunts to use after beating him down. However, when he noticed how calm Bai Xiaochun was acting, he suddenly realized that something wasn't right. Despite being surrounded on 3 sides, Bai Xiaochun's expression hadn't changed at all, and in fact, he seemed to find the situation somewhat odd. Looking like a master cultivator, Bai Xiaochun proudly said, "Oh, so that's how it is. Well, in that case I feel a lot better." Chen Fei's pupils constricted, and he felt even more ill at ease. However, now was not the time for pondering the situation. "Attack!" he barked, performing an incantation gesture to send his flying sword shooting toward Bai Xiaochun. At the same time, his two friends also performed incantation gestures and sent their flying swords into action. 3 flying swords were bearing down on Bai Xiaochun, who suddenly smiled. He didn't even produce a magical item, he simply stepped backward. To the eyes of Chen Fei and his friends, Bai Xiaochun just seemed to vanish into thin air. When he reappeared, he was right next to one of the burly men in the 4th level of qi condensation. The man's eyes went wide, but before he could do anything, Bai Xiaochun clenched his right hand into a fist and punched out. The fist moved with incredible speed, landing on the man's neck with a boom. The man's entire body was shaken, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood as he bent over backward. It was as if some massive object had slammed into him. He immediately flipped head over heels, slamming into a nearby tree. The tree shuddered, and the man coughed up some more blood, then collapsed, unconscious. This sudden development left the man's companion staring at Bai Xiaochun in complete shock. His mind felt as if it were being struck by countless bolts of lightning. Even in his wildest dreams, he would never have imagined that Bai Xiaochun could possibly move so fast or unleash such astonishing power. Chen Fei's face fell, and he gasped. Without even thinking about it, he backed up, looking at Bai Xiaochun in disbelief. "You." "Too weak," Bai Xiaochun said, looking like a profound master, alone in the world, unable to find a worthy opponent. Sighing, he took a step forward, appearing directly in front of the other 4th level qi condensation cultivator. The burly man let out a maddened shout, causing cultivation base power to surge wildly, sending the flying sword slashing toward Bai Xiaochun at top speed. However, because of the undying live forever technique, and his undying iron skin, Bai Xiaochun's fleshly body had reached a shocking level. He easily sidestepped the sword, then once again punched out with his right fist. A boom rang out, and the man let out a miserable shriek. Blood sprayed everywhere as he was sent spinning backward. There was no tree for him to run into, so he landed about 30 meters away, his internal organs vibrating painfully. He couldn't even get back to his feet. He just lay there, seemingly struggling to hold on to life. Too weak, Bai Xiaochun said, shaking his head. Then he looked back at the trembling Chen Fei.
Ju.
Chen Fei's mind was spinning, and he suddenly felt like a complete fool. He had absolutely no confidence in being able to win now. Bai Xiaochun had suddenly transformed into something like a wild beast. 2 fist attacks had easily knocked out his 2 friends. That in itself required an incomprehensible amount of power. Subconsciously swallowing, Chen Fei backed away. He had no desire to keep fighting, and the only thing he could think about now was to flee. Before he could get very far, though, Bai Xiaochun flew forward at top speed, hand clenched into a fist which sped toward Chen Fei. Before it could land, a flashing light appeared in front of Chen Fei, and a little buckler materialized, which met Bai Xiaochun's fist. The resulting boom caused Bai Xiaochun to sigh. He shivered slightly, but at the same time, the buckler trembled, and it was sent spinning off to the side, its spiritual energy fading rapidly. Chen Fei was now scared out of his mind. He had spent quite a few merit points on that buckler, and it should have been able to hold out for a while even against the 6th level of qi condensation. And yet, Bai Xiaochun had severed his connection with it in a single blow. Bai Xiaochun, why you push things too far, he shrieked. HMPH. Let me tell you, today you will truly understand what it means to be bullied. Your bones are going to be broken and your tendons severed. Bai Xiaochun was happier than ever to see the terror in Chen Fei's eyes. He would never give up an amazing chance like this. Furthermore, he didn't just repeat Chen Fei's words, he also unleashed his cultivation base, allowing the power of the 6th level of qi condensation to erupt out. A huge wind swept up, sending his hair flying about, and his energy soaring. 6th level of qi condensation. Chen Fei gasped, his eyes bulging and his scalp tingling in fear. He staggered backward as Bai Xiaochun closed in with another punch. This time, there was nothing he could do to block it, and the fist slammed into him. Blood sprayed out of his mouth as he flew backward, his entire body vibrating. A miserable shriek rang out. It didn't matter that he was as broad-shouldered as a bear and as tough-looking as a lion, or that he was in the 5th level of qi condensation. He was now going all out to escape, heart filled with intense bitterness, rueing his decision to try to ambush Bai Xiaochun, in a place so far away from the sect. However, Bai Xiaochun was chasing after him like a wild beast, causing Chen Fei to shriek, "Bai Xiaochun, aren't you afraid of violating sect rules?" Bai Xiaochun cleared his throat, then repeated Chen Fei's own words. "Sect rules? Ha ha ha. We're outside of the sect right now. Plus, you don't measure up to me at all in skill. No one's going to blame me for breaking a few bones and severing a few tendons. At the worst, I'll have to make some apologies, and then the whole matter will be over with." Then he kicked out with his foot. That kick sent Chen Fei flying up into the air, where he once again coughed up a mouthful of blood. A look of despair appeared on his face, and he screamed. However, before he could even land on the ground, Bai Xiaochun began to batter him with more punches and kicks. Chen Fei was terrified, and couldn't stop screaming. Soon, he was completely swollen from head to toe, and his screams were weakening. His bones were broken, his tendons severed, and his face ashen. He soon lay there, numb and staring at Bai Xiaochun in complete horror. Although Bai Xiaochun was pure, fair, and somewhat skinny, what Chen Fei saw was a vicious beast disguised in human skin. That was even more so the case when Chen Fei realized that Bai Xiaochun hadn't even used any magical items. He had only relied on the terrifying strength of his own body to crush him. Off in the distance, the 2 burly men in the 4th level of qi condensation regained consciousness, and when they saw what was happening, their scalps went numb and their hearts began to pound. They immediately pretended to go unconscious again, not daring to move lest they attract the attention of Bai Xiaochun. Seeing that Chen Fei was gasping for breath, Bai Xiaochun finally lost interest. He settled his spiritual energy, then emptied their bags of holding and also took the little shield. Humming a little tune, He continued on his way down the path. As he watched Bai Xiaochun leaving, Chen Fei wanted to cry, but no tears would come. Who the hell told me that Bai Xiaochun won the Fragrant Cloud Peak competition by pure chance? If he had known all along that Bai Xiaochun was this terrifying, not even the threat of being beaten to death could have convinced him to stir up trouble. As for the other two burly men, they were scowling miserably, hearts filled with terror as Bai Xiaochun made his way off. Elder brother Chen, what do we do now? Let's just leave him alone. Let bygones be bygones. I heard that's what Xu Baocai did. The two men anxiously awaited Chen Fei's response. Chen Fei's heart was filled with bitterness. After a moment of thought, he gritted his teeth. I want revenge, but can't get it myself. What should I do? I need to think. Bai Xiaochun returned to the sect humming a little tune and feeling secretly delighted. After reaching his courtyard, he sighed. I practice immortal cultivation to live forever. People like that who are always fighting and killing are complete lunatics. He sat down in his courtyard and began to organize the various items he had taken from Chen Fei and his friends. They were by no means rich, which meant that Bai Xiaochun didn't actually make off with very much, although he didn't really care either way. When he was finished, he took out the medicinal plants he had just purchased and examined them carefully for a while. Although he had a profound foundation in plants and vegetation, he actually didn't have much experience dealing with the plants themselves. Now that he was able to examine these plants in person, his observations melded with the information that already existed in his mind. He even scratched the surfaces of some of the plants off to examine their internal structure. After doing some tests, a thoughtful expression appeared on Bai Xiaochun's face, and he pulled out the two random formulas he had acquired. After glancing at the formula for replenishing spiritual energy, he focused on the other formula, designed for mortals who wished to strengthen their physical bodies. Longevity incense, he murmured. This particular medicine formula didn't require the use of very many medicinal plants, only 7. Furthermore, there wasn't anything very special about the way they interacted. However, by using the techniques of mutual augmentation and suppression, it was possible to draw up the power of those 7 medicinal plants, crush them into a powder, and then turn that into incense. 2 of the plants were even toxic. If a cultivator consumed them, it would merely lead to 2 weeks of diarrhea. To mortals, however, they would be fatal. There are many types of spirit plants in heaven and earth. Some can be directly ingested, whereas others need to be concocted into pills to bring out their optimum effects. There are many which, because of their toxicity, can only be used to concoct incense. Muttering to himself, Bai Xiaochun took out the medicinal plants needed for the longevity incense, whereupon he began to study them in minute detail. I'm still not totally confident in this, he thought. The most important thing to think about in concocting medicine is the success rate. Even the simplest Tier 1 spirit medicines still have a high rate of potential failure. I have 10 sets of each medicinal plant. I can't waste them. Bai Xiaochun was a cautious person, and preferred to be confident before doing anything. That was exactly how he had been back when he had absorbed himself in memorizing all the different types of plants and vegetation, and the current situation was the same. Instead of immediately trying to concoct the medicine, he preferred to pore over the medicine formula first. 7 days passed. After fully absorbing the information from the medicine formula, he then closed his eyes and began to analyze the matter further. It was evening when he finally opened his eyes. Then, after a bit more thought, he produced the formula for the spiritual energy replenishing medicine and began to review it. 2 more weeks passed. Bai Xiaochun's eyes were bloodshot, but by now, he felt that he completely understood all of the various medicinal plants that were part of these medicine formulas. After more thought, he rose to his feet and walked out of the courtyard. Medicine concocting required a pill furnace, but those were quite expensive, more expensive than Bai Xiaochun could afford. Thankfully, in the medicine concocting pavilion, there were pill furnaces available for use by disciples in their medicine concocting, at the price of a few merit points. The medicine concocting pavilion was on the east side of Fragrant Cloud Peak, not too far from where Bai Xiaochun lived. It wasn't like the 10,000 medicines pavilion, which was always teeming with crowds of people. The medicine concocting pavilion was a relatively quiet and peaceful place. After all, even on fragrant Cloud Peak, people who qualified to concoct medicine were relatively few in number. Of that small number, quite a few already had their own personal pill furnaces, and didn't need to come here to rent one. Bai Xiaochun paid for the right to use the medicine concocting pavilion facilities for an entire month. He was given a personal workshop, complete with a protective spell formation that prevented any interference from outside while he worked. Clutching the wooden key he had been given, Bai Xiaochun quickly found workshop number 13 and walked inside. It wasn't very large, and was completely empty except for the pill furnace and the flame which burned beneath it. After sitting down cross-legged, Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath, then examined the pill furnace closely. When he tried to manipulate the flame with some spiritual energy, he found that he could cause the flame to grow much hotter, filling the entire room with intense heat. At the same time, the pill furnace itself began to glow bright red. Drawing upon his foundation in the violet chi control art, he performed some tests, and quickly got used to the intense heat. It didn't take long before he became familiar with how to control the level of the flame. Finally, he slapped his bag of holding to produce the various types of plants and vegetation. The longevity incense is too important to put first on the list to concoct. First I'll get familiar with the general concoction process, then I'll start out with the spirit replenishing pill. That's a tier 1 pill, useful for the 5th level of chi condensation and lower. Bai Xiaochun was now completely determined. Expression very serious, he mentally reviewed the medicine formula for the spirit replenishing pill, then began to concoct. He produced the first medicinal plant, then waved his hand, causing the leaves to fall off. Eyes gleaming with concentration, he sent his internal spiritual energy out, forming a powerful yet gentle force that crushed the leaves together into 9 beads of sap, which he then dropped into the pill furnace. A plopping sound could be heard, and a green mist instantly rose up within the pill furnace. Bai Xiaochun's eyes gleamed brightly, and as soon as the mist actually appeared, his hands flew through the air as he extracted the stems and veins of the medicinal plant, which he then tossed into the furnace as well. Occasionally, he adjusted the flame, ensuring that more and more mist built up inside the furnace. None of that mist escaped outside, though. It congealed together, swirling as Bai Xiaochun pulled out the second medicinal plant. After catalyzing it briefly, the medicinal plant bloomed with flowers, the petals of which he plucked and put into the pill furnace. Time passed. Bai Xiaochun was completely focused on what he was doing as he pulled out one medicinal plant after another. Soon he was on the 8th plant, and his eyes were shining brightly as he stared at the pill furnace. As he continuously adjusted the temperature of the flame, sweat dripped down his face. 2 hours later, a muffled rumbling could be heard from inside the pill furnace. Black smoke poured out, to be absorbed by the room's spell formation. Bai Xiaochun was choking and coughing, and a frown could be seen on his face as he stared at the charred slag inside of the pill furnace. Failure, he murmured. Sitting down and placing his chin on his hand, he began to think. After reviewing everything he had done, he didn't begin another batch immediately. After all, he was a cautious person, and whether it came to memorizing plants and vegetation or concocting medicine, he always wanted to do it in the most prudent way possible. He contemplated the matter for 3 full days. During that time, he reviewed what he remembered regarding his first attempt at least 1,000 times. That helped him to identify at least 50 problematic areas. Finally, he took a deep breath, rested for a moment, and then once again heated up the furnace. The actual time it took to produce the pill wasn't very long. 4 hours later, the pill furnace emitted rumbling sounds once again, and when the smoke cleared, the spoiled remnants of the pill once again became visible. At this point, his stubborn determination once again rose up. Removing the slag from the pill furnace, he examined it closely, then compared it to the information he had gleaned so far about medicine concocting. He then spent 10 more days further examining the medicine formula, as well as the plants and vegetation involved. Finally, eyes bloodshot, he began to try a 3rd time. The 3rd batch seemed much more stable, but just in the moment when the pills were about to solidify, everything fell apart, accompanied by muffled booms. Bai Xiaochun leapt forward and stared at the slag again. After more thought, he sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes to ponder the matter further. This time, he spent nearly half a month. His time in the medicine concocting pavilion was almost up. Finally, his eyes opened, and he gritted his teeth as he began a fourth batch. Eventually, his time was up, and the most recent batch was a failure. If any journeyman apothecary could observe what was happening, he would find it hard to believe. Almost any other person would have attempted at least dozens of batches of medicine within a month's time, and would have succeeded in at least some of them. Even if they only came up with one pill in the end, it would still count as a success. After all, most people viewed medicine concocting as something extremely difficult. If that weren't the case, then there would be more than a mere 2 master apothecaries in all of the eastward continent. Even journeyman apothecaries were not very common, and most of them didn't have any hope of ever becoming master apothecaries. Of course, the real reason for that was, most people didn't have access to the resources which were needed to truly develop as a journeyman apothecary. In the end, though, if anyone worked long enough at it, their chances of eventually becoming a master apothecary would be much greater. Therefore, most people believed that the best way to increase one's success rate in medicine concocting was simply to practice a lot. And that was why most people simply pursued practice. After you got familiar enough with the process, your confidence in success would increase. Of course, simultaneously, journeyman apothecaries came to view failure as an ordinary thing. After a failure, one could just begin again, and thus slowly improve. That was especially true of the more ordinary medicinal pills. Ingredients for pills like that were not very expensive, and could be used as fuel for that hard work and practice. However, Bai Xiaochun walked a different path than others. He went much slower, and after every failure, he would spend more time analyzing why he had failed than he had in the actual concocting process. This had a lot to do with his caution. It would even be appropriate to call him scrupulous. Only a bit of that scrupulousness had come out during his time studying plants and vegetation. Now that he was making his first foray into medicine concocting, his scrupulous nature increased dramatically, becoming the most outstanding aspect. Because of that scrupulousness, he was able to identify even more problem areas than the average person would. In fact, the number of problems that other people might identify couldn't even compare. He thought and pondered the matter in ways that others wouldn't even consider, and thus identified various fishy areas. Because of his caution, even the slightest problem was something he would wish to control before he continued with any concocting. It was because of these reasons that he spent so much time thinking. The month had passed. Bai Xiaochun's hair was disheveled and his face was streaked with ash. Exhausted, he left the medicine concocting pavilion and returned to his courtyard, where he sat there thinking and reviewing. There are still 9 problem areas. Once I solve those problems, I should be able to continue with the medicine concocting. Gritting his teeth, he sat there in his courtyard, eyes closed, analyzing the matter, occasionally taking a medicinal plant out to observe and study. Half a month passed before he suddenly rushed out, spent the merit points, and entered the medicine concocting pavilion again. The 5th batch was a failure. After analyzing the matter for 7 more days, he found more problems, solved them, and then tried again. The 6th batch was a failure. His eyes were bright red. He spent 20 days contemplating the matter before trying a 7th batch. 2 hours into the process, no rumbling sounds could be heard. Instead, a medicinal aroma spread out, and Bai Xiaochun's face lit up. There inside the pill furnace were 2 green medicinal pills. The 7th batch was a success. He tried again, and the 8th batch succeeded, producing 3 pills. The 9th batch succeeded, producing 5 pills. The 10th batch also succeeded, however, in the end, only 1 pill appeared. It was not green, but rather black. Furthermore, it emanated no medicinal aroma, but rather different odd scent. Even as Bai Xiaochun pondered the matter curiously, the entire medicine concocting pavilion was thrown into an uproar.